The call came at 3:17 a.m. on March 15th. I knew before I answered. When your 90-year-old grandmother has been battling Alzheimer's for 8 months, calls at that hour only mean one thing. Mr. Thornfield, this is Mercy General Hospital. I'm afraid your grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep about an hour ago. I sat on the edge of my bed, the Portland rain pattering against our bedroom window, and felt something inside me break. Grandma Rosalind hadn't just been my grandmother, she'd been my everything after my parents died in that car crash when I was 12. She raised me, put me through college, taught me what it meant to be a decent human being. My wife Evangeline stirred beside me. What is it, Marcus? Grandma's gone. Evangeline sat up immediately, wrapping her arms around me. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I know how much she meant to you. The next few hours passed in a blur. Evangeline took charge of everything, calling the funeral home, handling the paperwork, making arrangements. I was grateful. I couldn't think straight. You don't need to deal with all this bureaucratic nonsense right now, she said, rubbing my shoulders as I sat at our kitchen table, staring at nothing. Let me handle the estate stuff. You just focus on grieving. I nodded. Evangeline was an estate planning attorney. If anyone could navigate the legal maze, it was her. And honestly, I couldn't face thinking about money and paperwork when all I wanted was to have one more conversation with the woman who'd shaped my entire life. The funeral was beautiful. Grandma's church was packed. She'd touched so many lives in her 89 years. I gave the eulogy, somehow managing to get through it without completely breaking down. Evangeline held my hand throughout the service, the picture of a supportive wife. She was so proud of you, Evangeline whispered as we left the cemetery. She told me that every time I visited her. That was true. Even as the Alzheimer's progressed, Grandma would light up when she saw me. Toward the end, she might not remember my name, but she knew I was someone she loved. 2 weeks after the funeral, Evangeline sat me down with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. Okay, so I've been going through everything with the estate, she said, sliding on her reading glasses. There are some complications. What kind of complications? Well, there are some tax issues, and the probate process is more complex than I initially thought. It might take several months to sort everything out. I frowned. I thought Grandma had everything set up in a trust. She always said she wanted to make things easy. She did, but there are still some administrative hurdles. Don't worry about it. I'll handle everything. That's what I do for a living, remember? I squeezed her hand. What would I do without you? You'll never have to find out, she said, kissing my forehead. Over the next few weeks, Evangeline seemed to be constantly on the phone with lawyers and accountants. She'd disappear into her home office for hours, emerging with updates about regulatory delays and paperwork complications. These things just take time, she assured me whenever I asked. The important thing is that we do everything by the book. In April, she announced we were going to renovate our kitchen. Don't you think we should wait until the estate is settled? I asked, watching contractors tear out our perfectly functional cabinets. We can afford it, Evangeline said. We've been saving for years and life's too short to live with that ugly backsplash forever. The renovation was extensive. New appliances, custom cabinets, granite countertops. It had to cost at least $50,000. But Evangeline handled all our finances, and she'd never steered us wrong before. That's when I first met him. Damian Cross showed up one morning in May, wearing work boots and a tool belt, with the kind of easy confidence that made other men instantly dislike him. You must be Marcus, he said, extending a calloused hand. Damian Cross, Cross Construction. Your wife hired us to handle some work on a property from your grandmother's estate. Estate property? Yeah, apparently your grandmother owned some rental properties that need updating before they can be sold. Evangeline's handling all the details. She seems to really know her stuff. I was confused. Grandma had lived in the same modest house for 40 years, As far as I knew, it was her only property. But Evangeline had mentioned something about various assets that needed to be evaluated. Right, I said. Well, thanks for helping out. Damien grinned. No problem. Your wife's a real professional. Makes my job a lot easier when the client knows what they want. Something about the way he said, your wife, bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. By late May, Evangeline dropped a bombshell. I found us a house, she announced over dinner. Found us a house? Well, I found us our house. The house we're going to buy. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of a stunning modern home in the hills overlooking Portland. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, gourmet kitchen, infinity pool. It's perfect. I nearly choked on my wine. Ava, that place has to cost over $2 million. 2.3 actually, but we can afford it. How can we possibly afford it? The insurance settlement came through. Your grandmother had a life insurance policy I didn't know about. A big one. I stared at her. How big? Big enough. She reached across the table and took my hand. Marcus, your grandmother wanted us to be comfortable. She wanted us to live well. This is her gift to us. I thought her life insurance was just enough to cover the funeral expenses. That was one policy. This was a different one. An old whole life policy she'd been paying into for decades. The funeral home helped me track it down. Something felt off, but I couldn't argue with documents. Evangeline showed me paperwork from Metropolitan Life Insurance showing a death benefit of just over $2 million. I had no idea, I said, shaking my head. Your grandmother was a private person about money. She didn't want you to feel like you were waiting for her to die. That sounded like Grandma. She'd always been modest about her finances, even though I suspected she had more than she let on. We toured the house the next day. It was incredible. Everything I'd ever dreamed of but never thought we could afford. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a chef's kitchen that made our renovation look amateur, a master suite with views of Mount Hood. What do you think? Evangeline asked as we stood on the deck overlooking the infinity pool. It's amazing, I said honestly. But are you sure we can afford it? I'm sure, trust me. And I did trust her. We'd been married for 7 years and she'd never given me reason to doubt her judgment about money. If she said we could afford it, we could afford it. We put in an offer that afternoon. It was accepted within hours. The closing was scheduled for June 15th. Evangeline handled all the paperwork, working closely with Damien Cross's construction company to coordinate some immediate renovations. Damien's going to install a home office for me, she explained, and update some of the electrical work. It's better to do it before we move in. Damien seemed to be around constantly, measuring rooms, discussing fixtures, consulting with Evangeline about design choices. He was friendly enough, but there was something about the way he looked at my wife that made me uncomfortable. You're lucky to have such a hands-on partner, he said to me one afternoon as I watched him install a new light fixture. Most wives don't know the first thing about construction. Evangeline's pretty capable, I said. She sure is. The way he said it made my skin crawl. The week before closing, I decided to surprise Evangeline by handling some of the estate paperwork myself. She'd been working so hard, and I felt guilty letting her carry the entire load. I called First National Bank, where Grandma had done her banking for 30 years. Hi, this is Marcus Thornfield. I'm calling about my grandmother's estate, Rosalind Thornfield. She passed away in March. Oh, Mr. Thornfield, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Thornfield was such a lovely woman. How can I help you? I just wanted to check on the status of her accounts. My wife has been handling everything, but I thought I should touch base. There was a pause. I'm sorry, sir, but I show that all of Mrs. Thornfield's accounts were closed in March. The beneficiary designations transferred everything immediately upon her death. Beneficiary designations? Yes, sir. Mrs. Thornfield had set up transfer on death instructions for all her accounts. Everything transferred automatically to the designated beneficiary on March 15th. My mouth went dry. Who was the beneficiary? I'm sorry, I can't disclose that information over the phone. You'd need to come in with proper identification. I hung up and sat in my car outside the bank for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd just learned. Grandma's accounts had been closed, everything transferred to a beneficiary, but Evangeline had been telling me for months that the estate was tied up in probate. That afternoon, I went to the bank in person. The branch manager, Mrs. Fleming, remembered Grandma well. Such a sweet woman, she said, pulling up the account information on her computer. Though I have to say, we were a bit concerned about her in those final months. Concerned how? Mrs. Fleming hesitated. Well, she seemed confused, disoriented. She came in several times to make changes to her beneficiary designations, but she didn't seem to understand what she was doing. My heart started pounding. What kind of changes? Originally, you were listed as the primary beneficiary on all her accounts. But in January, she came in with your wife and changed everything. Your wife became the sole beneficiary on all accounts. The room started spinning. In January? Yes, January 20th. Mrs. Thornfield seemed very confused during the meeting. She kept asking why she was there and what the paperwork was for. Your wife explained that it was just a routine update to make things easier when the time came. Did you raise any concerns? Mrs. Fleming looked uncomfortable. We did follow protocol. We asked Mrs. Thornfield several times if she understood what she was signing. She said yes, but she trailed off. But what? But one of our tellers wrote a memo expressing concern about Mrs. Thornfield's mental state. She seemed to have trouble understanding basic concepts about the transactions. What happened to that memo? It was reviewed by management, but ultimately we decided that Mrs. Thornfield was competent to make her own decisions. She had your wife there to help explain things. I felt sick. How much money are we talking about? Mrs. Fleming checked her screen. The total transfer was approximately $2.1 million across all accounts. $2.1 million. Almost exactly what we'd paid for the house. Can I get copies of the paperwork? I'm sorry, but since you're no longer the beneficiary, I can't provide that without a court order. I drove home in a daze. $2.1 million. Grandma had left everything to Evangeline instead of me? That didn't make sense. Grandma had always talked about leaving me everything so I'd be comfortable after she was gone. But the timing bothered me even more. January 20th. Grandma's Alzheimer's symptoms had become much more pronounced by then. She'd started forgetting my name, getting confused about where she was, asking the same questions over and over. When I got home, Evangeline was in her office on the phone. No, the electrical work needs to be finished before we move in, she was saying. I don't care if it costs extra, just get it done. She looked up when I walked in. Hey, honey, how was your day? Ava, we need to talk. Something in my tone made her sit up straight. What's wrong? I went to Grandma's bank today. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Oh? Why? I wanted to help with the estate paperwork. Imagine my surprise when they told me all her accounts were closed in March. Everything transferred to a beneficiary. Evangeline was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. I was going to tell you about that. Tell me what? Your grandmother. Marcus, this is hard to say, but your grandmother changed her will in those final months. She left everything to me instead of you. I stared at her. That's impossible. I know it hurts. I know it doesn't make sense. But she was getting confused, and I think she was worried about you handling a large inheritance. She thought it would be better if I managed everything and made sure you were taken care of. Eva, Grandma was losing her mind by January. She couldn't even remember my name half the time. I know. That's why I've been so careful about how to handle this. I didn't want to hurt you by telling you that she'd changed her mind about the inheritance. She didn't change her mind. She couldn't have. She wasn't competent to make that kind of decision. Evangeline's voice got sharp. Are you accusing me of something, Marcus? I'm trying to understand why my grandmother, who loved me more than anything in the world, would suddenly decide to leave everything to my wife instead of me, especially when she was suffering from dementia. Maybe because your wife is an estate planning attorney who actually knows how to manage money responsibly? The words hung in the air between us like a slap. I can't believe you just said that. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. Evangeline stood up and came toward me. Marcus, I'm on your side here. Everything I'm doing is for us, for our future. Our future, or your future. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard Evangeline pick up her phone. Damien, we need to talk. Tonight. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Grandma's doctor. Dr. Helena Nash had been treating Grandma for the past 3 years and had managed her Alzheimer's care. Marcus, I'm so sorry for your loss, Dr. Nash said, inviting me into her office. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. Dr. Nash, I need to ask you about Grandma's mental state in her final months, specifically in January. Dr. Nash pulled up Grandma's file on her computer. By January, your grandmother's cognitive decline was quite advanced. Her MOCA scores had dropped significantly. MOCA scores? Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It's a standard test for cognitive function. Normal scores are 26 to 30. Your grandmother scored 28 when I first diagnosed her Alzheimer's. By January, she was scoring 12. What does that mean in practical terms? It means she would have had significant difficulty understanding complex concepts, managing finances, or making major decisions. She was also experiencing increased confusion and disorientation. Would she have been competent to change her will or beneficiary designations? Dr. Nash was quiet for a moment. In my professional opinion, no. By January, your grandmother lacked the cognitive capacity to understand the nature and consequences of major financial decisions. Could you testify to that if necessary? If subpoenaed, yes. I have detailed documentation of her cognitive decline. I left Dr. Nash's office with copies of Grandma's medical records and a growing certainty that I'd been betrayed by the person I trusted most. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator. Cassius Vale specialized in financial crimes and domestic investigations. He was expensive, but he came highly recommended. Tell me what you suspect, he said, after I'd laid out the basic facts. I think my wife convinced my grandmother to change her beneficiary designations when Grandma wasn't mentally competent to understand what she was doing. That would be elder financial abuse, a felony in Oregon. Cassius made notes on a legal pad. What else? I think she might be having an affair. With? A contractor named Damien Cross. Something about their interactions feels off. I'll look into both angles. This kind of investigation usually takes several weeks. Are you prepared for what we might find? I need to know the truth. Even if it destroys your marriage? My marriage might already be destroyed. I just don't know it yet. Cassius started surveillance immediately. Within a week, he had his first report. Your wife is definitely having an affair, he said, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. These photos were taken yesterday afternoon. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The photos showed Evangeline and Damien in an apartment I didn't recognize. They were kissing, embracing, clearly intimate. How long has this been going on? Based on what I've observed and some preliminary checking, at least 18 months. Possibly longer. 18 months. That meant the affair had started around the time Grandma's Alzheimer's symptoms began worsening. Around the time Evangeline started visiting Grandma more frequently, helping with paperwork. There's more, Cassius said. Your wife rented that apartment in December. She's been paying for it with cash. Cash from where? That's what we need to find out. But I found something else interesting. This isn't Damian Cross's first time getting involved with a married woman who suddenly comes into money. He showed me another file. 3 years ago, Cross had an affair with a woman named Rebecca Martinez. Shortly afterward, her elderly father died and left everything to her instead of his other children. The family sued, claiming financial elder abuse, but couldn't prove anything. What happened to Rebecca? Divorced, bankrupt, and Cross moved on to his next target, which appears to be your wife. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole. You think this is some kind of pattern? I think your wife and Cross are running a sophisticated elder abuse scheme, and your grandmother wasn't their first victim. Over the next 2 weeks, Cassius compiled a devastating case. Bank records showed that Evangeline had moved Grandma's money through multiple accounts to obscure its origin. The apartment rental, the house down payment, even the kitchen renovation. Everything had been funded with Grandma's stolen inheritance. More disturbing, Cassius had identified 3 other elderly clients of Evangeline's law practice who had died in the past 5 years, all leaving their estates to unexpected beneficiaries with connections to Evangeline. She's been doing this for years, Cassius explained. She identifies elderly clients with substantial assets and cognitive decline, gains their trust, and then manipulates them into changing their estate planning documents. Why hasn't anyone caught her? Because she's smart about it. She targets people with limited family connections, and she uses her legal expertise to make everything look legitimate. If the families do object, it's their word against an estate planning attorney. But she made a mistake with Grandma. She got greedy, and she underestimated how much you'd investigate. I called Dr. Nash and asked her to review all of Grandma's medical records from the final year of her life. Your grandmother's cognitive decline was well documented, Dr. Nash confirmed. Her MMSE scores show progressive deterioration. By January, she scored only 8 out of 30. Could she have understood what she was signing when she changed her beneficiary designations? Absolutely not. At that level of cognitive impairment, she wouldn't have understood basic financial concepts, let alone the implications of changing her estate planning. Would you testify to that? Yes. In fact, I'm obligated to report suspected elder abuse. If you have evidence that someone took advantage of your grandmother's condition, we need to contact Adult Protective Services. I met with Tobias Gray, an investigator with Adult Protective Services, the next day. He reviewed Cassius's findings and Dr. Nash's medical records. This is a clear case of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, Gray said. Your grandmother was obviously incapacitated when these changes were made. We'll open a formal investigation immediately. What does that mean? It means we'll review all the documentation, interview witnesses, and if we find evidence of criminal activity, we'll refer the case to the district attorney's office for prosecution. How long does that take? Given the complexity of this case and the amount of money involved, probably several months. But Marcus, I have to tell you, this looks like one of the most sophisticated elder abuse schemes I've ever seen. 2 days later, Evangeline came home from work looking shaken. Marcus, we need to talk. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing financial documents Cassius had obtained. About what? Adult Protective Services contacted my office today. They're investigating me for elder abuse related to your grandmother's estate. Are they? Don't play dumb with me. I know you reported me. Actually, Dr. Nash reported you. Once she understood what had happened, she was legally obligated to report suspected elder abuse. Evangeline sat down across from me, her hands shaking. Marcus, you don't understand what you're doing. This could destroy my career. Your career should be destroyed. You stole from my dying grandmother. I didn't steal anything. She gave me power of attorney and asked me to handle her affairs. Power of attorney doesn't give you the right to change beneficiary designations for your own benefit, especially when your principal is mentally incompetent. She wasn't incompetent when she made those decisions. I pulled out Dr. Nash's medical records and slid them across the table. She had dementia, Eva. Severe dementia. She couldn't even remember my name half the time, but somehow she decided to leave everything to you instead of me? Evangeline glanced at the medical records, but didn't pick them up. People with dementia can have lucid moments. For $2.1 million? That's one hell of a lucid moment. Marcus, please. We can work this out. I was trying to protect the money for us. For our future. Whose future? Yours and Damien's. She went very still. What? I pulled out one of Cassius's photos and placed it on the table. It showed Evangeline and Damien kissing outside the apartment. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Evangeline stared at the photo for a long time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hard. You hired a private investigator. I hired a private investigator because my wife was lying to me about everything. The estate, the money, the affair, everything. How long have you known? About the affair? 2 weeks. About the inheritance theft? A month. Inheritance theft? Marcus, your grandmother left that money to me legally. She left it to you while she was mentally incompetent. That's not legal. That's elder abuse. Evangeline stood up abruptly. I'm not discussing this anymore without my attorney. Good idea. You're going to need one. She started toward the stairs, then turned back. For what it's worth, I did love you once. But you loved the money more. She didn't deny it. The next morning, Evangeline was gone. She'd packed a bag and left while I was sleeping. I found a note on the kitchen counter. Marcus, I'm staying somewhere else while we figure this out. My lawyer will be in touch. Please don't do anything else that might hurt both of us. I crumpled up the note and threw it away. Then I called Cassius. She's gone, probably staying with Cross. That's actually good news, Cassius said. It makes them look more guilty. Also, I have some updates on the financial investigation. What did you find? Your wife has been moving money around for months, trying to hide its source. But I traced it all back to your grandmother's accounts. The house down payment, the renovations, even that apartment rental. Everything came from the inheritance. Can we prove that? I've got bank records, wire transfer documentation, everything. Plus, I found something else interesting. What? Damien Cross's construction company received over $400,000 in payments from accounts linked to your grandmother's estate for renovation work on properties that don't exist. Money laundering. Exactly. They were using his business to clean the stolen money. I felt a grim satisfaction. How much evidence do we have? Enough to bury them both? I'm preparing a complete report for the district attorney's office. 2 days later, Detective Sarah Morrison from the Portland Police Bureau called. Mr. Thornfield? I'm investigating allegations of elder financial abuse related to your grandmother's estate. Could you come in to give a statement? I spent 3 hours at the police station, walking Detective Morrison through everything I'd discovered. She was thorough, professional, and clearly experienced with financial crimes. This is a complex case, she said, after reviewing all the evidence. But based on what you've shown me, there's probable cause to believe that felony elder abuse occurred. What happens next? We'll present the case to the district attorney's office. If they decide to prosecute, we'll seek warrants for your wife and Mr. Cross. How long does that take? Given the amount of money involved and the strength of the evidence, probably not long. A week later, the Portland police arrested Evangeline at her law office. Damien Cross was arrested at a construction site the same day. Both were charged with conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, theft in the first degree, and money laundering. The story made the local news. Prominent estate attorney arrested in elder abuse scheme. Evangeline's law practice was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. I felt no satisfaction watching my wife's mugshot on the evening news. Only a deep, aching sadness that it had come to this. But I wasn't done. The criminal case was just the beginning. I hired Sterling Blackwood, one of Portland's most aggressive civil litigation attorneys, to pursue asset recovery. The criminal case is about punishment, Sterling explained during our first meeting. The civil case is about getting your money back. Can we get it back? All of it, plus damages. What your wife did was intentional interference with inheritance expectancy. Oregon recognizes that as a tort. What does that mean in practical terms? It means you can sue for the full value of the inheritance, plus punitive damages, plus attorney's fees. And since the money was used to buy assets like the house, we can impose a constructive trust to recover everything. Sterling filed a civil lawsuit the next day, seeking $6.5 million in damages and asset recovery. We also filed emergency motions to freeze all assets purchased with the stolen inheritance. The house was the first to go. A judge granted our motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing the property pending the outcome of the civil case. Your wife can't sell it, mortgage it, or even live in it, Sterling explained. The court has essentially declared that the house belongs to your grandmother's estate. Damian Cross's construction company was next. We traced nearly $500,000 from Grandma's accounts to Cross Construction, supposedly for renovation work that never happened. Money laundering, Sterling said with satisfaction. The judge is going to love this. The civil case moved faster than I expected. With the criminal charges pending, neither Evangeline nor Damien wanted to risk testifying in civil court. Their lawyers tried to delay the proceedings, but Sterling was relentless. They're hoping the criminal case will be resolved first, he explained. But civil and criminal cases operate on different standards of proof. We can win the civil case even if they somehow beat the criminal charges. 6 months after Grandma's death, I sat in a courtroom watching my wife's life fall apart. Dr. Nash testified about Grandma's cognitive decline. By January, Mrs. Thornfield was severely impaired. She could not have understood the nature or consequences of changing her beneficiary designations. Mrs. Fleming from the bank testified about Evangeline's visits with Grandma. Mrs. Thornfield seemed confused and disoriented. Our teller wrote a memo expressing concern about her mental state. The teller who wrote the memo, Melissa Rodriguez, testified that Grandma kept asking what she was signing and why she was there. She seemed scared and confused, Rodriguez said. I recommended that we postpone the meeting until Mrs. Thornfield could bring someone else to help explain things, but the attorney insisted they proceed. Cassius Vale presented his financial investigation, showing how the money flowed from Grandma's accounts to the house purchase, the apartment rental, and Cross Construction. This was a sophisticated scheme designed to hide the source of the funds, Cassius testified. The defendants used multiple accounts and business entities to launder the stolen money. Evangeline's lawyer tried to argue that Grandma had made the changes during a lucid interval, but he couldn't produce any medical evidence to support that claim. Damian Cross's lawyer argued that his client was merely providing legitimate construction services, but he couldn't explain why Cross Construction was paid $400,000 for work that was never performed. The judge wasn't buying any of it. The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Thornfield was mentally incapacitated when she allegedly changed her beneficiary designations, Judge Cordelia Reeves said in her ruling. The defendants took advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman with dementia to steal her life savings. This court will not allow such reprehensible conduct to stand. The civil judgment was devastating. $6.2 million in damages, including the full inheritance, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The judge also imposed a constructive trust on all assets purchased with the stolen money. What does that mean? I asked Sterling afterward. It means everything they bought with your grandmother's money now belongs to you. The house, Cross's business assets, everything. They have to turn it all over. Even if they appeal. Even if they appeal. The constructive trust is effective immediately. I took possession of the house the next week. It felt strange walking through rooms that had been bought with Grandma's stolen money, but also satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. The master bedroom had been decorated for a couple planning their future together. Now it was evidence of betrayal and greed. Cross-construction was more complicated. The business had legitimate assets and ongoing contracts, but everything purchased with laundered money was subject to the constructive trust. "We'll hold a judicial sale," Sterling explained. "You can bid on the business assets just like anyone else. If you want to buy the company, this is your chance." I'd been an engineering consultant for 15 years, but I'd always been interested in the construction business. And there was something appealing about turning Cross's money laundering operation into a legitimate enterprise. I bought Cross Construction at the judicial sale for $1.2 million. It was a good deal. The company had solid contracts and experienced employees who had nothing to do with Cross's crimes. The employees were relieved when I explained that I planned to run the business ethically and honor all existing contracts. Mr. Cross was a good boss in some ways, the foreman told me, but there was always something shady about his finances. None of us knew where all the money was coming from. I renamed the company Thornfield Construction and made it clear that we would operate with complete transparency and honesty. Meanwhile, the criminal case was moving toward trial. Federal prosecutors had gotten involved because of the interstate money laundering and the pattern of elder abuse across multiple victims. FBI agent Lysander Pike briefed me on the federal investigation. "Your wife and Cross are part of a larger pattern," Agent Pike explained. "We've identified 7 elderly victims across 3 states, with total losses exceeding $8 million. $8 million. Your grandmother's case was the largest single theft, but there were others. All elderly people with cognitive impairment, all targeted by attorneys or financial advisors who gained their trust. Is this organized crime? We're considering RICO charges. The pattern suggests an organized criminal enterprise with defined roles and systematic targeting of vulnerable victims. The federal charges carried much heavier penalties than the state charges. Evangeline was looking at 20 years in federal prison if convicted." Her lawyer approached Sterling about a plea deal. "She wants to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence," Sterling told me. "She's willing to testify against Cross and provide information about other victims." "What would she get?" "Probably 10 to 12 years instead of 20, plus full restitution to all victims." "What do you think?" "I think justice is more important than revenge. If her cooperation helps convict Cross and recover money for other victims, it might be worth considering." But before we could negotiate a plea deal, Cross's ex-wife contacted the FBI. Serafina Cross had been divorced from Damien for 2 years, but she'd kept detailed records of his financial activities. "I always suspected he was stealing money from somewhere," she told Agent Pike. "He'd have these sudden windfalls that he couldn't explain. New trucks, expensive tools, cash payments that didn't match his legitimate income." Serafina provided bank records showing a pattern of unexplained deposits into Cross's accounts, often coinciding with the deaths of elderly people. "He bragged about having wealthy girlfriends who helped with his business," Serafina said. "I thought he was just sleeping around. I didn't realize he was targeting women with elderly relatives." The federal case went to trial 8 months after the arrests. I testified about Grandma's cognitive decline and the timeline of the beneficiary changes. "Mrs. Thornfield raised me after my parents died," I told the jury. "She was the most important person in my life. The defendants stole her money while she was dying of Alzheimer's disease. They betrayed her trust when she was most vulnerable." Dr. Nash testified about Alzheimer's disease and its impact on decision-making capacity. "Patients with severe dementia cannot understand complex financial concepts," she explained. "Mrs. Thornfield would not have been capable of making informed decisions about changing her estate planning." The bank employees testified about their concerns during Evangeline's visits with Grandma. "Mrs. Thornfield kept asking what she was signing," Melissa Rodriguez repeated. She seemed frightened and confused. We should have stopped the meeting. The financial evidence was overwhelming. Cassius Vale and FBI forensic accountants traced every dollar from Grandma's accounts to the defendant's assets. This was money laundering on a massive scale, the lead prosecutor told the jury. The defendants used sophisticated techniques to hide the source of stolen funds, but the paper trail is clear. Evangeline's defense attorney argued that she was manipulated by Cross, portraying her as another victim. Ms. Thornfield was a respected attorney who fell under the influence of a manipulative criminal, the lawyer claimed. She made terrible decisions, but she was not the mastermind of this scheme. Cross's attorney argued that he was simply providing legitimate construction services and had no knowledge that the money came from elder abuse. Mr. Cross is a hard-working contractor who trusted his romantic partner to handle the financial arrangements, the lawyer said. He had no reason to suspect that Ms. Thornfield was stealing from her own family. The jury didn't buy either defense. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Evangeline was convicted of conspiracy to commit elder abuse, wire fraud, money laundering, and RICO conspiracy. Cross was convicted on similar charges. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, Adult Protective Services and the FBI had identified more victims. 3 additional families came forward with stories similar to mine. Elderly relatives who had suddenly changed their estate planning documents during periods of cognitive decline. The Yamamoto family had lost $1.8 million when their grandmother changed her will to benefit a helpful attorney who had been managing her affairs. The Rodriguez family lost $900,000 when their grandfather's investment accounts were transferred to a financial advisor's business partner. The Baker family lost $1.2 million when their mother's trust was amended to benefit the contractor who was supposedly renovating her house. All the cases followed the same pattern: vulnerable elderly victims, trusted advisors who gained power of attorney, and sudden changes to estate planning documents during periods of cognitive decline. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Reeves heard victim impact statements from all the affected families. These defendants targeted the most vulnerable members of our society, one victim's son said. They stole not just money but the dignity and final wishes of people who trusted them. I spoke last. My grandmother worked her entire life to leave me an inheritance. She wanted to take care of me after she was gone, just like she took care of me when I was a child. The defendants stole that gift and used it to fund their affair and their lifestyle. They showed no mercy to a dying woman with dementia, and they deserve no mercy from this court. Judge Reeves agreed. She sentenced Evangeline to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Cross received 12 years. The defendants preyed upon elderly victims with cognitive impairments, Judge Reeves said. They exploited positions of trust to steal millions of dollars from families across multiple states. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise that caused immeasurable harm to victims and their families. The judge also ordered full restitution to all victims, $8.3 million total. The defendants must disgorge all proceeds from their criminal activity, Judge Reeves said. Every dollar stolen from these families must be returned. After the sentencing, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back Grandma or restore the trust that had been broken. Sterling Blackwood handled the restitution and asset recovery process. Because of the constructive trust and civil judgment, I was able to recover everything: the house, the construction company, and every dollar that had been stolen. You're one of the few victims who will recover their full losses, Sterling told me. Most elder abuse victims never see their money again. What about the other families? They'll get some money from the Federal Victim Restitution Fund, but probably not everything they lost. Your wife and Cross don't have $8 million in assets. That bothered me. The other families had suffered the same betrayal, but they wouldn't get the same justice. I decided to do something about it. Using the recovered assets and the profits from Thornfield Construction, I established the Rosalind Thornfield Elder Protection Foundation. The foundation's mission was to help elder abuse victims recover stolen assets and prevent future abuse. We'll provide legal assistance to families fighting elder abuse cases, I explained to the foundation's first board meeting. And we'll educate banks and other institutions about recognizing the warning signs. The foundation's first case was helping the Yamamoto family sue the attorney who had stolen their grandmother's money. Using the template Sterling had developed for my case, we were able to recover most of their losses through a constructive trust. This is exactly what your grandmother would have wanted, Dr. Nash told me when I asked her to serve on the foundation's board. She always cared about protecting vulnerable people. Dr. Nash and I had stayed in touch after the trial. She was remarkably dedicated to her elderly patients, and I found myself attracted to her combination of professional competence and personal warmth. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" I asked her after a foundation board meeting. "I thought you'd never ask," she said with a smile. Our relationship developed slowly. We both understood the importance of taking time to build trust after what I'd been through. "I've seen too many families destroyed by elder abuse," Helena said over dinner one evening. "What you've done with the foundation, it's making a real difference." I had to do something. Grandma would never forgive me if I just took the money and forgot about other victims. "That's what I love about you. You could have walked away after getting your inheritance back, but you chose to help others instead." 2 years after Grandma's death, Thornfield Construction had grown into one of Portland's most respected builders. We specialized in accessible housing for seniors and took pride in treating every client with the respect and honesty they deserved. "It's ironic," my foreman observed. "This company was built on stolen money, but now it's helping build homes for the same kind of people who were victimized." The Elder Protection Foundation had helped recover over $12 million for abuse victims across the Pacific Northwest. We'd also lobbied successfully for stronger banking regulations requiring additional oversight when elderly customers make major financial changes. Banks now have to follow a pause and review policy, I explained to a conference of elder law attorneys. If a customer over 65 with documented cognitive impairment tries to make significant beneficiary changes, the bank must wait 72 hours and notify other family members. The policy was named the Rosalind Thornfield Rule, and it had already prevented several attempted elder abuse cases. Evangeline wrote me letters from prison, alternating between apologies and attempts to justify what she'd done. "I never meant for things to go this far," she wrote in one letter. "I thought I could take care of the money better than you could. I thought we'd be happy together." I never responded to the letters. There was nothing left to say. Cross tried a different approach, having associates threaten me and the foundation's work. Those attempts resulted in additional federal charges and 3 more years added to his sentence. "Some people never learn," Agent Pike told me after Cross's latest conviction. "He's going to be in prison until he's 55. By the time he gets out, your foundation will have helped hundreds of families." 3 years after the trial, Helena and I got married at Grandma's church. It was a small ceremony, attended by family, friends, and many of the elder abuse survivors we'd helped through the foundation. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Helena's father told me during the reception. "You've turned her tragedy into hope for other families." Standing in the church where I'd given Grandma's eulogy, I felt her presence more strongly than I had since her death. She'd always believed that good could come from even the worst situations. "She's here with us," Helena whispered, squeezing my hand. I nodded, too emotional to speak. 5 years after Grandma's death, I visited her grave on the anniversary. The headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved grandmother and protector of those who could not protect themselves." I brought fresh flowers and a copy of the Foundation's annual report. "We helped 87 families this year, Grandma," I said, kneeling beside the grave. "Recovered $15 million in stolen assets, and we got the banking laws changed in 6 states." The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and I felt that familiar sense of peace that came from knowing I was honoring her memory. I got your money back, I continued, every penny, and I made sure they can never hurt another family. Helena joined me, placing her own flowers on the grave. Hello, Grandma Rosalind, she said softly. I'm taking good care of your grandson. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset over the cemetery. In the distance, I could see the lights of Portland, where the Foundation's offices were helping another family fight for justice. Evangeline still had 13 years left on her sentence. Cross had 10 years remaining. The money they'd stolen had been transformed into a legacy of protection for vulnerable seniors across the country. The foundation now operated in 12 states and had helped recover over $50 million for elder abuse victims. We'd also trained thousands of bank employees, lawyers, and healthcare workers to recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. Your grandmother's death wasn't in vain, Helena said as we walked back to our car. Look what's grown from her tragedy. I thought about that as we drove home to the house that had been bought with stolen money, but was now filled with love and purpose. Grandma had always said that the measure of a person's life wasn't what happened to them, but how they responded to what happened. I'd responded by building something larger than revenge, something that would protect families for generations to come. At home, I opened my laptop and began writing the Foundation's next grant proposal. We were expanding into elder abuse prevention education, targeting the adult children of aging parents. If we can teach families to recognize the warning signs, I told the board, we can prevent abuse before it happens. The phone rang. It was our Portland office. Marcus, we just got a call from a family in Seattle. Their grandmother's attorney changed her will last week, and she's been diagnosed with dementia. They want our help. Send them the intake forms, I said, and schedule a video conference for tomorrow morning. Another family, another elderly victim who needed protection. Another chance to honor Grandma's memory by ensuring that no one else would suffer what we'd suffered. I looked at the photo of Grandma on my desk, the one from her 80th birthday, where she was laughing at something I'd said. She looked happy and proud, surrounded by the people who loved her. We're making a difference, Grandma, I said quietly. Every day, we're making a difference. Outside, the Portland lights twinkled in the darkness, and I felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that Evangeline and Cross's betrayal had ultimately led to protection for thousands of vulnerable seniors. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, about taking something evil and making it serve good. Grandma would have understood that. She'd always believed in redemption, in the possibility that even the worst situations could lead to something better. As I worked late into the night on the grant proposal, I could almost hear her voice. That's my boy. I knew you'd figure out how to make things right. The foundation would continue growing. More families would be protected. More stolen assets would be recovered. And somewhere in federal prison, Evangeline would serve the rest of her sentence knowing that her crime had ultimately created something far more valuable than the money she'd stolen. The Elder Protection Foundation was Grandma's true legacy, not just the money she'd saved, but the lives she was still protecting through the organization that bore her name. I finished the grant proposal and sent it off. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new families to help, new opportunities to honor Grandma's memory. But tonight, I was content knowing that I'd kept my promise. I'd gotten her money back, and I'd made sure they could never hurt another family. The stolen legacy had become a protected legacy, and that was exactly what she would have wanted. 10 years after the trial, I received an email from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Evangeline had applied for compassionate release due to a serious illness. Her lawyer was asking for a victim impact statement regarding her application. I thought about it for a long time before responding. I do not support early release, I wrote. The defendant showed no compassion to my elderly grandmother, who was dying of Alzheimer's disease. She exploited a vulnerable victim for personal gain and has never taken full responsibility for her actions. She should serve her complete sentence as ordered by the court. The application was denied. Cross was released after serving his full 12 years. He was unemployable in the construction industry and worked a series of low-paying jobs. His attempts to start new businesses failed when background checks revealed his elder abuse convictions. Good, Helena said when I told her about Cross's struggles. He made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences. The foundation's work continued to expand. We'd helped over 1,500 families recover stolen assets and had trained tens of thousands of professionals to recognize elder abuse. On the 20th anniversary of Grandma's death, the foundation hosted its largest fundraising gala ever. Over 1,000 people attended, including many of the families we'd helped and professionals we'd trained. 20 years ago, Marcus Thornfield lost his beloved grandmother to Alzheimer's disease, Helena said in her keynote speech. But he also lost something else, $2.1 million that his grandmother had saved to leave to him. That money was stolen by people she trusted during the final months of her life when she was most vulnerable. The audience was silent, listening intently. Marcus could have focused on his grief and anger. Instead, he chose to honor his grandmother's memory by protecting other families from the same betrayal. The Rosalind Thornfield Elder Protection Foundation has recovered over $200 million for elder abuse victims. We've helped change laws in 37 states, and we've trained over 50,000 professionals to recognize and prevent elder financial abuse. The applause was thunderous. But most importantly, Helena continued, we've ensured that Rosalind Thornfield's legacy lives on in every family we protect, every dollar we recover, and every abuser we stop. After the gala, Helena and I visited Grandma's grave one more time. 20 years, I said, placing fresh roses on the headstone. 20 years since you left us. But look what's grown from the pain. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind in the trees. The same trees that had been there when I was a grieving grandson who couldn't understand how anyone could steal from a dying woman. Now I understood that evil often carries within it the seeds of its own defeat. Evangeline and Cross's betrayal had created something far more powerful than they'd destroyed. I kept my promise, Grandma, I whispered. I got your money back. I made sure they could never hurt another family, and I turned your tragedy into hope for thousands of others. Helena took my hand as we walked back to our car. She's proud of you, she said simply. I nodded, feeling the truth of that in my bones. Whatever else had been lost, whatever betrayal had been suffered, this much was certain. Grandma's legacy lived on in every family the foundation protected. And that was worth more than any inheritance. The stolen legacy had become a protected legacy. Justice had been served not just through punishment, but through transformation. Evil had been turned to good. Pain had been turned to purpose. And love had proven stronger than betrayal. That was Grandma's true gift to me. Not the money that was stolen, but the understanding that our response to injustice defines us more than the injustice itself. As we drove home through the Portland streets, past the offices where foundation staff were working late to help another family recover their stolen inheritance, I felt the deep peace that comes from knowing you've lived up to your highest calling. Grandma would have been proud. And that was all that mattered. Epilogue. 5 years later. Evangeline died in federal prison after serving 16 years of her 18-year sentence. Her death certificate listed the cause as complications from the illness that had prompted her failed compassionate release application. I felt no satisfaction at the news, only a quiet sense that justice had finally run its full course. Her death made the local news, with reporters noting that she'd been part of one of the largest elder abuse conspiracies in Pacific Northwest history. The article mentioned that her victims' families had gone on to establish the Rosalind Thornfield Elder Protection Foundation, which had become a national leader in elder abuse prevention. Her crime ultimately led to protection for thousands of vulnerable seniors, the reporter wrote, It's a legacy the defendant probably never intended. Cross, now in his late 50s, continued to struggle with employment and housing. The elder abuse conviction followed him everywhere, making him essentially unemployable in any position requiring trust or financial responsibility. The foundation received occasional reports of his activities, always staying within the bounds of the law, but clearly bitter about his circumstances. He'd aged badly, looked much older than his years, and had developed health problems that he couldn't afford to treat properly. Sometimes the punishment continues long after the sentence ends, Helena observed. Meanwhile, the Foundation's work had expanded internationally. We were consulting with organizations in Canada, the UK, and Australia to develop similar elder protection programs. Elder abuse is a global problem, I explained to a gathering of international elder law experts. The techniques we've developed in the United States can be adapted to help vulnerable seniors anywhere. The foundation had grown from a small Portland nonprofit to a major force in elder protection, with offices in 15 cities and an annual budget of over $30 million. We'd helped recover more than $500 million for elder abuse victims and had trained over 100,000 professionals. But the real measure of our success wasn't in dollars recovered or laws changed. It was in the letters we received from families who'd been protected because someone recognized the warning signs we'd taught them to watch for. "Your training saved my mother from losing everything," one daughter wrote. "The bank employee you'd trained noticed that my mother seemed confused when she tried to change her beneficiary designations. They followed your pause and review protocol and called me. We discovered that her new boyfriend was trying to steal her life savings. Those were the victories that mattered most." On the 25th anniversary of Grandma's death, the foundation dedicated a new research center focused on developing early detection systems for elder financial abuse. The Rosalind Thornfield Research Center will use artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify patterns of financial exploitation before significant harm occurs, I announced at the dedication ceremony. The research center was housed in a beautiful building overlooking the Columbia River, with gardens designed to be accessible to elderly visitors. A bronze statue of Grandma sat in the main lobby, reading a book to a young child, representing her role in raising me and her continuing role in protecting families. The inscription on the statue's base read, "Rosalind Thornfield, beloved grandmother and eternal protector of those who cannot protect themselves." Helena and I stood before the statue after the dedication ceremony, remembering the woman who'd made it all possible. "She would never have imagined that her death would lead to all this," Helena said. "She always said that good people had an obligation to protect those who couldn't protect themselves," I replied. "She's still doing that, through everything we've built in her name." As the sun set over the Columbia River, I felt Grandma's presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as grief or loss, but as guidance and inspiration. The stolen legacy had become something far greater than what was originally taken. It had become a movement, a cause, a lasting protection for vulnerable people everywhere. And in the end, that was the most fitting tribute to a woman who'd spent her entire life taking care of others. Evil had tried to win through betrayal and theft, but love had won through transformation and service. That was Grandma's true legacy, and it would endure long after all of us were gone.